Hi, this is Jamie from Gardening It Grows on You, and today we're going to be talking about 4 things for you to think about before you purchase a plant. Lots of times I get asked to recommend a plant, and I go through several questions I ask people before when trying to figure out what plant they want. So these are 4 things that I think you should think through when you're asking for suggestions for a plant or before you walk down the aisles in a garden center. These things are going to help you kind of narrow down your search. Lots of things to think about when picking out a plant, and we're not going to go in detail. I just want to cover some basic guidelines. The first thing you want to think about when deciding on a plant is what type of plant do you want? And we're going to expand upon this in a little while. The next thing you want to think about is the light. What light requirements does a plant need? Also, number 3 is how's the soil like? What kind of soil do you have? Things like that. And then number 4 is how big do you want the plant to get? So when thinking about what type of plant that you want, the first thing you need to think about and determine is, do you want the plant indoors or outdoors? Because that's going to determine what plant you select. When thinking about this, there's some kind of crossover areas, like maybe you have a porch or maybe you have a sunroom. So some plants are a little bit more versatile in that sense, but you need to make a decision, indoor or outdoor. The next thing I want you to think about was, what type of light do you have? What are you going to be able to offer the plant when selecting the plant? So indoor plants, typically most plants like bright indirect light. Now there are some exceptions to all of these things, but that's the typical thing that plants like. The next thing you need to determine is what type of light the plant needs for the outdoor space. So you need to think about, does it take full sun? Does it take part sun? Or does it take shade? Sometimes that can be a little hard to determine. Sometimes you need to pay attention at multiple times of the day. And I will tell you that afternoon shade is not the same thing as morning shade. So even though we have sun, part sun, and shade, the part shade we separate into 2 separate categories. With my experience, depending on where you live, of course, but if you live in a warmer region, then you're going to lump the afternoon shade in with more of a part shade, a true part shade plant. So it'll get morning sun and afternoon shade. But if you're getting afternoon sun and it's been shady up until noon, and then it starts getting sun, then we're actually going to classify that in more as a sunny plant. Just because in the summertime it'll get that really direct heat and that direct light. So we actually need to be paying attention. Oh, it gets some sun. Well, what time of the day does it get the sun? Because that's going to determine some of the features of the plant. Well, how do you know what's full sun, what's part shade, what's shade? Typically, what we classify as full sun is 6 hours of sunlight on it, direct sunlight on it. Part shades can be somewhere around 4 hours. And then shade is, it either gets a couple hours of sun and then it gets shade the rest of the time. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is, how is your soil? Now we are going to talk about the specifics of soil. That would be a whole nother, that could be a whole nother video and a whole nother topic in itself. But what I'm really asking is, are you going to need to do something with the soil? So that's something you need to think about. We can talk about all the other components of soil at another time, but I just want you to be thinking about what type of soil it is. So if you're going to have an indoor plant, then you're typically going to get some type of potting soil. You need to think about what type of potting soil, what type of pot you're going to have. But if it's outdoors, you really need to take a look at your soil. You dig a hole, you take a look at what it's like. There's even some times where you can send off a soil sample. That's a really good recommendation if you don't have any starting point, especially if you are creating a new landscape or establishing a new one. then getting a soil sample tested is a really good way to determine how your soil is. The last thing I want to talk about is what size plant do you want? And so this could be taken as what size plant do you want to put in the ground. There's different size pots that you can already buy plants. You can buy a little tiny plant, or you can buy a big plant, the same one, so that could be taken. But what I really mean is you need to be thinking about what size it's eventually going to get to. For example, if you buy a large plant for the indoors, where's it going? Is it going to go on a windowsill? Is it going to go on the floor? Is it going to go on a office space, a desktop? Because those things can determine what size it's eventually going to grow to. If you get a plant that's going to grow really large, you may not want to set it on your desk. You may want to select a smaller plant. So when you're thinking about the size, you're thinking about the mature size of the plant eventually. So this, when we head to the outside and you're thinking about a plant, we classify things in different categories. We kind of lump all of these plants in either they're herbaceous, so we call them a annual or a perennial, or in that realm we have shrubs, or we have trees. And so sometimes trees can look like shrubs and sometimes trees vice versa. So when you're thinking about this, you need to be thinking about where it's going to go. For example, I've seen tons of signs out there. They put this large shrub in front of the sign. It grows up, then you can't read the sign. Maybe you have windows in front of your house and you want to put a plant and it grows up and it covers the window. Maybe you want to put it to the next to the mailbox and the plant is so large that it eventually overtakes the mailbox. So these are things that you need to think about, the ultimate size you want the plant. Not necessarily what size you're buying it at, but what size it's eventually going to be. There's lots of things for you to think about when you are picking out a plant. Either you're asking somebody to recommend a plant, or you are going somewhere that sells plants and you're trying to buy a plant, and it can be overwhelming. But if you think about these 4 things before you buy a plant, then you will at least have your idea of what kind of plant you want. So remember, the first thing is what type of plant you want, what type of light you have, what type of soil, and then ultimately the size. This is Jamie with Gardening It Grows on You. I hope you have a good day and get growing.